welcome to another episode of the Spice Girls podcast and the first episode of my new mini-series, A Life According To. And I'm here with Harold today. Hi, Harold.
Good morning.
How have you been?
I have been very well, thank you.
What have you been doing during your quarantine?
I do very well. We are well cared for. We've been here now for about 4 months, and we have no major issues here at our home.
And I've been asking everybody this. What's your take on all the current situations, the spike in cases, the masks, the requirement of masks?
Well, I believe that anything we can do to forestall this horrible, invisible disease should be done. And masks are a traditional source, been used in Japan and China for years and years in their various forms of pollution. And so it's a well-known technique to reduce the results that you might get from whatever it is, a disease or pollution.
Yeah. Now, back to the topic of this episode, Life According To, which is you, Harold. We're going to go back in time 80 years. I want to talk about what it was like growing up back then. What was the childhood like back then?
Well, I grew up in the time of what's known as the Deep Depression, the Great Depression. I was born in 1931. The stock market crashed in 1929. Therefore, my early years were lived during the Depression period. I did not feel that personally, but my parents were really concerned that we might starve to death. It was that severe. However, they had purchased a farm, an 8-acre farm, and they were growing potatoes and other vegetables, and were able to get through the Depression very well. And then things began to change in 1939 and 1940 when the World War II began, and then the United States, the personnel in the United States began to work, and the unemployment reduced, and therefore life began to change for the people in my age group.
Right. And when you were a kid, what were things that you would do for fun? It would be very simple. The activities that we did were around the rural part of the country, so it was very simple of playing, but we worked an awful lot. Children then did an awful lot of work. They had to help their parents. Children were considered a big asset. Some families had big families, a lot of children, because they wanted all the help they could get. So that was kind of the attitude in those particular days. My life really began with the school years, and while I went to the same school for 12 years, the building housed all 12 grades, and I became a real fan of basketball. So for 4 years in high school, I was called the basketball manager, and I got to travel to all the games and be with the basketball team the entire time. So my high school period was occupied by a love for basketball and sports. Interesting. I also wanted to ask about your school. Was it a very small school?
The total attendance in high school was 80 people.
80 people.
80. My class was the largest, 22 people, with 16 boys and 6 girls. So it was a class that wasn't very well behaved. Boys, for some reason, do not have the discipline that girls do, at least in high school.
Yeah, that's actually pretty, not insane, but weird to think about. Because my freshman class, my sophomore class now, has about 350 members, and I'll tell you that's a big bunch to get used to. And even my school itself, my whole high school has about 1,100 kids. And to think that your school had about 80 out of all the grades, that's a big number difference.
Yeah, this was a rural-based high school, so it wasn't like the city high schools these days. All the city high schools are consolidated. Number of schools have been reduced, and each school is bigger, so that made them more efficient. At least that's the theory, that they're more efficient.
Right, and even my school is not in the city. Mine is actually in the country. And I mean, my city is growing, but if you could go 2 minutes and it'd be all farm fields.
2 minutes?
2 minutes and just farm fields.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
Splendid.
Yeah. And then talking about teen life, was teen life, I know it was very different than it is now, but how different was being a teen than it is now?
You know, I'm not really able to tell you that because I don't know exactly what teens are today.
Right.
But then the same issues that existed today, some of them existed then. Drugs at that time were not a big issue. Youngsters, smoking was an issue, and wanting to drink alcohol beverages before the age of legitimacy was also an issue. So those were the two things that happened for the most part. There was still some intimidation of minority type people. We had no minorities in our school because we were in a rural area that had not attracted any minority people, except one distinct boy appeared to be partially Chinese. I don't think he was, but he had characteristics that way. And he was unmercifully hounded by the student body. And I felt very bad about that. But that was the one incident I remember very much where somebody was bullied, had no reason to be treated that way. We did have bullying of youngsters. I know I was a small featured boy at that time, and the people that were larger and oftentimes would try to take advantage and bully me. I was fortunate that I did have another very large friend, and he tended to protect me, so I personally had no really bad issues, but I do know that there were a lot of bullying take place in those days.
Yeah, bullying can be much more severe nowadays with social media and even just the amount of kids at school now. I mean, I personally never been bullied, but I have found myself to be the bully sometimes. I mean, not severely, but I'd be kind of rude to the other students. And when I think about that, I'm like, what am I doing? what am I doing? But going back to the farming, you farmed yourself with your family.
Yes, I lived on the farm for actually 21 years.
And did your whole school, did each kid have a family farm, or?
Most of them did come off of the family farm, but some of them, their fathers worked in industry.
Right.
So there were people that drove to nearby cities. In our case, a drive of 15 miles to some of the larger cities. And so some of the fathers worked in those cities and were industrial. The rest of them were agriculture in some way or another.
Yeah, right. I know I never personally farmed, but I did have a small little farm plot there for a while. We'd grow tomatoes, beets, asparagus, peas. And I remember it was pretty enjoyable, but it'd start to get pretty stressful after a while. Because it was a garden plot, so you'd have to keep weeding it every day. Go out there and water it. Like I'd have to go after school and ride out there on my bike and water it, harvest the plants, and eventually after time we kind of were just unmotivated to do it, and it kind of just fell apart. Did you ever feel unmotivated to do the work?
I don't, or there were times that I didn't necessarily want to, but my father loved to work, and so I was the only boy in the family. I had a sister. She helped my mother. I helped my father, and that's kind of the way it went year after year. I did love driving the tractor, but in the early years I learned what a hoe was, and I got very familiar with a hoe. We did, in the early years, we used horses to plow with, but then we got to the tractor stage. And when I was 9 years old, I began driving a tractor on the farm to help. And by the time I was 12, I was driving our truck on the farm and the other vehicles. So I became very active when I was 12 and beyond, milking cows, driving the tractors and the trucks, and had a very active farm life.
Right. And now, speeding up through time, I know you've told me before you worked for an engineering company.
Right.
What was that?
Cummins Engine Company.
And that's a pretty big, pretty well-known company?
Well, yes, it is now. When I began working for them was in 1956. At that time, they had 3,000 employees and one factory. When I left 40 years later, retired and did other things, they had 25,000 people and 24 factories. So there was a big change there. Today, they have grown even more, and they have 60,000 people with factories all over the world.
And that's kind of cool because in that 40 years of working there, you kind of got to grow with them in a way, right?
In that 40 years, I saw tremendous change.
Right. As the company grew?
Oh, yes, definitely. The company really began to grow before I joined it, of course, in the late 1940s when they made a lot of engines for the war effort. And that really got them started big time. And then they had successful products, and after World War II, then they were very successful providing engines to power all kind of things, especially highway trucks, which became very popular after World War II.
Right. And what was your role? What was your job in?
Well, I started out
helping determine what the capacity should be to grow engine production. And that was my first job, was to try to develop that. My second job was to try to work on, we never made camshafts as a company, we always bought them. So my next job was to help determine machinery and processes to make our camshafts in our own factories. That was a big job for me for a couple of years. And then we bought a crankshaft plant in another city, and I went to work there as a plant manager, or actually a production manager, and also did their manufacturing engineering at that time for a lot of different products that we were trying to make. And then as time went by, I became engineering manager for one of our plants in Columbus, and then from there became a plant manager for another plant that we had in Illinois. And after that, I was eventually became director of manufacturing engineering for our company worldwide. So I had to travel throughout the world where we had plants and help them establish optimum operations from a manufacturing viewpoint.
So you really got to move up in the company as it grew too.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it was a great time to be with a growing company. One of the great experiences, my colleagues have often said, our experience with the company would probably never be duplicated in the way we got to experience ourselves. So we had a great experience, and we're just really very, very pleased with the success of the company. But even with the success, we also went through a lot of trials and tribulations of economic ups and downs. But in the final analysis, the company came through and is a very successful company yet today.
And as you moved up in ranks in your career, you had to have enjoyed your job, right?
Oh yes, if you don't enjoy your work, then you don't do the best job that you can do. So I was always pleased with the work. A lot of hard work. Early on, it was 14-hour days, so it was a very big strain on the family, because my dedication to the job was a requirement, or you just weren't going to be successful if you didn't put all you had into the job, and that's what I tried to do.
Right. And during your time working for Cummins, did you have a family at that time?
Yes,
Wife
I ended up with 4 children.
And what was it like for them growing up?
Well, we had a pretty good income, so they were able to enjoy their school and their sports. My wife was really very, very good at taking them to the sport events and supporting them. Where I couldn't be there, they still got to do the things. So there was probably some loss on their parts by me not being available, but overall they thrived. Some of them became very good athletes themselves, even going to state tournaments. So there was a lot of success there on their parts.
did they go to a public school?
Yes, they all went to public schools.
Was their school fairly big too, or was it?
Yes, well, big by my standards, but my oldest son graduated in a class of 1,000 students.
Ooh.
So that was big at that time, but now the schools actually have broken into 2 high schools or 2 schools so that none of the classes reach 1,000 anymore.
And in your time working for Collins and your kids growing up, was it in this house here?
No. No, this house was not built until 1983, and so from 83 to 96, I worked at Cummins and lived here. Then I retired from Cummins in 1996, although I did work for them on a contract basis even after I retired.
But your wife and kids have, as growing up as children, did they live in this house?
Yes. All but one. One of them was out on his own by the time, but the rest of them, yes, 3 of them lived here.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, one more thing. If I asked you, what are if someone asked you what are 3 words someone wanted to remember you by, what would you say?
3 words for what?
To remember you by 3 words to describe yourself. If someone to remember you by.
It's a good question. I hadn't thought much about that. My wife was asked that once, and she said, "Well, he's generous." So that was one tag that she put on me. I am very dedicated. I want to be very honest with people, and I'm also very conservative.
Nice. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Harold.
Thank you.
From me, Spice Grizz, to the listeners, thank you for listening today. Catch you later.
Oh